Hello and welcome to the Project Hope podcast for families and friends with a loved one in a group of high demand, high control. I am your host, Jennifer. A lot has changed since I first started this podcast, so I thought I'd add a little to the initial introductions and provide something that's more up to date. I work with survivors of coercive control one-to-one. I also consult with families, and I offer education to the public around such topics. For the full scope of what I offer and also my credentials, you're welcome to check out my website, jennifer-french.com. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control, and as of August 2024, I've been accepted into a PhD program called Psychology, Policy, and Law, and I'll have a specialty in either criminal behavior or forensic victimology. This will support the work that I currently do as an expert witness in cases involving coercive control. The Project Hope podcast has provided such an amazing opportunity for me to meet many wonderful people, survivors, experts, family members, and it's truly a pleasure to meet each one of these individuals you will hear from. This podcast will conclude with Season 2 as I enter into my PhD program, but I have many other exciting things on the horizon, so please stay in touch and go to my website for any and all current events. Thanks to all of you who listen to Project Hope and care about this community. Welcome back to part 2 of Megan and Dom's story about their religious backgrounds and their journeys together through a religious cult, a charismatic non-denominational church, and a Southern Baptist church that all exhibited signs of spiritual abuse. As their website states, as survivors of spiritual abuse in diverse church settings, they've dedicated their lives to preventing spiritual abuse in institutional settings and serving others who have also been abused under the guise of Christianity. They hope to provide a safe place for victims of spiritual abuse to share their stories without judgment. They want to identify spiritually abusive wolves within organized religion to protect others from harm. And this is part of their mission with BaptistAccountability.org. And they want to help others identify the signs and symptoms of spiritual abuse through their written works and educational resources, as well as through speaking engagements. So please also check out the USA Today article that features Megan and Dom's full story. The article, along with their writings, can be found on their website at churchtrauma.org. And of course, please go to the podcast show notes in order to see Megan and Dom's websites and any and all references and resources discussed during the podcast.
We had been out away from Oakwood after we stepped down for 2-ish months. Maybe it was a little longer. It had been a while. Yeah. And I still kept in touch with 2 people from the church regularly, 2 of my friends. And the one friend, I was on the phone with her. Well, I wasn't actually on the phone with her. We were texting. And we were still just like texting back and forth about, any news, like, have you figured out what the heck's going on at the church yet? And she still had no idea. And, I just said, I just feel something in my gut so strong, but I would feel bad to ever say it out loud. And she just said, well, if you ever do want to say it out loud, call me. And so I was just like, what the heck? I'm just going to call her because this had been eating at me, and I said, okay. I said, I'm not like declaring that somebody did this. Nobody's guilty. I don't know. I know nothing. This is just my gut is telling me this. Because of my past experiences, I feel this knowing that I wonder if there's sexual sin. I was still calling it sin at the time. I don't use that word anymore. But I said, was there sexual sin, behind whatever's happening? Yeah. And she said, wow, that's interesting. And I talked about one of the pastors that I knew had some kind of an affair in the past. That had been a rumor, just a rumor. I said, I don't know that that's even what's true about that. And she said, well, do you know about Don Foos's conviction? You okay?
Excuse me. I just took a drink down the wrong pipe.
Okay.
We're keeping it real here.
And so she said, you okay?
I'm good.
You don't look so good.
Okay. It was the weight of what you just shared. I'm choking up.
Oh my goodness. Here.
No
Do
more
you need
drinks.
another drink?
Yeah. Let's not drink.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. So back to the scenario. I'm saying, do you think it's sexual sin? And brought up this other pastor. And she said, well, do you know about Don Foos's convictions? I said, convictions? Like legal convictions? And she just kind of was really quiet then. And she just said, you need to run background checks on the pastors. And I'm like, okay. And she said, her husband and her had done that a while back. And I said, okay. And she didn't even want to tell me what I was going to find. I'm like, wow. Okay. So she knew something that we didn't know. And that's when we got online right away. And Dom put in Pennsylvania anyway, you can pay money and do a background check on anyone. Anybody can do it. So we paid a hefty chunk of change and we did background checks on all 5 pastors. We're like, we might as well just do it on everybody. Because if there's something going on, who knows what it is. And so that takes like a week or 2 to come back.
But you get an immediate response if there's something, right? So it'll say, oh, all is good. Almost immediately you'll get that. Or in one specific case out of the 5, it said, well, there's something there. We'll send you the report, the results. Now you're coughing.
It's just total sympathy cough.
That's very sweet.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Okay. So where were we?
So we ran a background check on all 5. Yeah. We got a hit on one of them.
But before that even came back, you got a hit. So we got online and just started Googling. Yeah. And the first thing that came up was that
Pennsylvania Department of Education
had revoked his teaching license.
Yeah.
And it literally had a quote in there that said he is deemed like, what was it? A danger to the children of the Commonwealth.
Danger to the safety of the children of something like that, where this person is a danger to children. Yeah. It's by the Pennsylvania Department of Education.
And so we're just like floored. We're like, what? And meanwhile, so he is one of the pastors at the church. At this point, he's the head pastor because the other pastor left. He has also been for quite a while, years, at least.
The superintendent of the school.
The superintendent of the school that the church ran.
That our daughter went to.
Which is the preschool.
Our children went to.
3 of our children went. And yes, and it was, the school is a preschool and kindergarten. That is still open and running. And I am actively on Facebook and social media trying to warn local people because I do not believe this place should still be open, but we can get into all of that. But they have rehabbed supposedly. I don't think they should have been given the chance. The same director's still there. It's just horrendous to me.
So anyway,
all that to say.
So we discovered this information.
Yeah, and then
our minds popped.
Yeah.
One is our minds popped, and immediately as parents, we're thinking, oh my gosh.
Oh, that's the first thing is you're thinking, my kids. Like my kids, what happened to my kids?
12 years of being here with this.
And this guy he was very hands-on with our kids, like roughhousing.
Hands-on with the children. And we thought, oh, well, that's just his personality. And that's how it was written off by other, church leaders. Oh, it's just Don being Don. And
yeah.
But then there's
grandfatherly.
But at one point, he had patted our daughter on the butt. And
I freaked out in the moment, but I froze.
Yeah.
And we went home and talked about it. And we talked ourselves down to, this was when we were first at the church, actually, earlier on.
This being when he had patted our daughter on the butt.
Yeah, he wasn't. And she was young. She was only 5 or 6 at the time. And anyway, we went home and talked, and we kind of talked ourselves down to, certainly he's just being grandfatherly.
Yeah, it's like, not a threat.
Now I know that's not grandfatherly ever. Like, in fact, now if their grandfather did that, I'd be calling the police. Like, I won't even let their grandfather do that. So I just was dumb at the time.
The power of the environment, the groupthink, the fact that everything's supposed to be biblical and spiritual and loving. I mean, these are all things that just kind of set, again, this environment where you can barely even comprehend when you see a pat on the butt that there's something wrong with that. I mean, it really, it makes so much sense to me, of course.
But it's amazing to me how outsiders who are not Christians especially can see this immediately.
Yeah.
They don't have any problems saying, oh my gosh, that's so inappropriate. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's
the contextualization.
But Christians often, even not all, I might say most Christians we've talked to say so, like, oh my gosh, that's horrible,
Yeah.
But there are some that are like, oh, how are you sure he was probably just grandfatherly, or
But again, those people, none of those people were in that environment with you.
Right,
and that's really what it's about. It's about time and spending lots of time receiving these messages. It's not just
everything
that you showed up and 2 months later you saw that and were fine with it. It was over this period
of time. You've been made to feel so safe and so accepted
and that's the environment. And I mean, there's so much on this, and we'll reference like Jimmy Hinton and others that have done research in this, that environment has been cultivated since who knows when, for how long, as church is safe. And I'm overgeneralizing and dumbing it down, but church is a safe place, right? And, there's forgiveness and grace, and we're a family, and all of this stuff, this cultural stuff creates this bubble that, and
it turned out that was so after we found all this out.
Thank you.
Yes. So we kind of said to the friend of mine who had brought it up, it was like she was hit over the head by a 2x4. She was like, we knew this, but we believed the story that it was a false accusation, and he just pled he pled no contest to spare his family.
Never pled guilty. It was no contest.
And she just believed, we just believed it. We never questioned it. And I just said to her, I said, but what if you were going to a school where you didn't know anybody and you found out that the superintendent was a convicted child molester? Would you be okay with that? And it was like, and she tells me this now, she admits it. She's like, I don't know how I didn't see it. And now she's like, oh my gosh, like, of course this isn't okay. But her and her husband had known this for a while, but again, had believed there had been a story that it was a false accusation. So meanwhile, we said to them, well, we're kind of gone now. We don't have a voice. Why don't you guys just deal with it? And we were kind of thinking, we'll just bow out here. Like,
it's your church now.
Your church now, go for it.
Good luck.
So they right away scheduled a meeting with all the pastors, elders in that church. They were the same thing. And then she told me about it afterwards, that we came up and that she told them that Megan and Dom have found out and they are not keeping quiet about it. Like, they have already started talking to some people. And so then they're
asking questions.
They're freaking out. Well, I wish they would have come to us first. Well, of course they do, and
yeah, the first people.
Why would we trust them? Yeah. They were the ones having conflict that we knew there was something very wrong. And why would we trust those people, like, to tell us the truth? So.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the board, during some of these strange incidents that were covered up, by others on the board. And, so the first thing I did was I started making phone calls to other board members, because the saying at the church was, well, once a board member, always a board member. Like, we're family, and I was on the board for 6 years
because we had so many kids, and
but then we let, I stepped down, and, so I reached out to another board member and said, look, how do you ask someone this, right? So I said, look, are you aware of any allegations, or, I'm just beating around the bush about, do you know of anyone that may have, been convicted of anything involving children? Oh, well, I heard rumors, but, I never looked into it. And this was another board member. And I'm like, well, how could you not look into this? Like, if it's a rumor, like, you need to do your due diligence to protect children. And, so, I started digging around, like, is this common knowledge? Like, how did we not know this? And, what happened here?
So there's just so much. I mean, I don't know if we can get to everything, but I would say then after our friends had this meeting and they discussed us, okay, then I emailed them back. I did not nail that down. It was me. They didn't email us. I emailed them back and I said, I heard, and by the way, it's kind of taboo in Baptist circles for women to do the communicating, but too bad. Too bad. I said, I heard that we were we did sign it, both of us, so that it would be kosher.
Because they would probably throw it out otherwise.
Yeah.
That's a whole other side.
That's a whole other side to it. The whole patriarchal
hierarchy of authority. And
that's a big part of what goes on and what
inside the bubble.
Yeah. So we can get to that if we need to. But all that to say, we heard we were discussed. We didn't come to you because we don't trust you, because you're not being transparent about anything. And how dare you do this? Like, how dare you not tell us that our kids are exposed, to a child molester for 12 years, like, convicted? Who are you to say this was a false accusation? How do you know? Like, and how do you make that decision for all these parents that send their kids to this school, which, by the way, that number was over 800 families over the years. Even though it was a tiny church, over 800 families cycled through that day school over a 12-year period. Wow. More than that before that, but just over the 12 years, it was at least 800. Wow. And it was more than that because that's how many letters had to be sent out. But anyway, a lot to say. So they asked if we would come and meet with them. And we said, okay, we'll do that. It was the most unbelievable experience of my life to sit there and their defense.
So there were how many pastors there at this point in time? There were three of the pastors were in the room because 2 had left. So there were 3 pastors now at the church.
And then our friends came for moral support. The ones that had been.
One was still on the board, right?
Yeah, he was still on the board.
The husband was on the board, and the wife was the one that you had talked with. So
yeah.
So this.
Thank heavens she was there. Because I ugly cried half of this meeting, and the men literally went on talking as if nothing was happening. I'm like wailing like a banshee, and they're totally ignoring me. It was unbelievable.
It was a fantastic meeting, and I mean fantastic in the worst possible light. So the 3 of them, it was like the good cop, bad cop thing, right? But they just justifications.
Planned this. It was very planned.
Yeah, there were a lot of justifications why this wasn't a big deal. One of them took the theological route of, well, there's grace and forgiveness, and
God can forgive anything
at all.
We're saying, sure, he can.
Yep.
But he can't be a pastor or working in a school.
Yeah. Another
he can be forgiven. He just can't work those places.
That's all. And I use the analogy, I still remember this for some reason, of, yes, there is forgiveness, but we're talking about something different. So if, I work at a bank and I steal money, there can be forgiveness and I can, do my time and get out and everything's great. But a repercussion of that is I don't work at a bank again. And in this case, if you've abused children, you don't work with children again. So there was the theological thing. There was this is just because of the Sandusky thing, and remember the other was generation. Well,
let's get into the Sandusky thing real quick, because there's a little bit on that. The Sandusky trial, and then the laws in Pennsylvania changed after that. I don't know if you're familiar with that. the Sandusky. I think it's a pretty
yes,
national
Sandusky, yeah.
thing. But yeah, the laws in Pennsylvania changed after that to where everyone that works with children or is anywhere near children, even volunteer, is a mandated reporter. If they see anything, and everyone who works near children, volunteers, anything, has to have background checks done before they, so they can work with children.
Amazing.
That law was not followed, and there were no repercussions. The law was overlooked. Straight and simple. There's no other explanation. I have asked the police investigator about this. He tried to say it was grandfathered in, but I know that's not true. They were required to have background checks because he was exposed to children regularly. He was in the same building.
day.
His office was 6 feet from the girls' bathroom. So there's no justification that he wasn't around children. And I kind of lost my train of thought here. So they didn't, that still, even though there was an investigation after this and everything, it just never, why have mandated reporting laws if you're not going to enforce them? I don't understand. But yeah, so that was that. And they said, well, we wouldn't even be dealing with this if it weren't for Sandusky, as if it was a bad thing that we now protect children better. I was just sick about that. And then
the Gen Xer thing, that was good.
And then the next thing was
a generational issue that.
Yeah, you young people, because of the internet, you think you are entitled to know everybody's business. In our days, your past was your past, and you didn't have to tell anybody. And
no, was your age.
Yeah, we're like, no.
Well, isn't it fascinating though that, and once again, you guys are so brilliant at telling these sort of details of the story that we get to hear these three arguments that are clearly so messed up.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet what's interesting is that because these are the people that are leading, that poison sinks into everything.
Yeah.
It does.
And then when people come innocently saying, I have a valid concern here, they can't even address it because the poison is in the mind and they can only think through that poison.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a whole system. The entire evangelical church, but especially the Southern Baptist, this is huge all Baptists, not just Southern Baptists, Southern Baptist, Independent. I would say the Baptists are the worst with this because in Baptist churches, there are no qualifications for becoming a pastor at all. It is literally the church ordains you. Yeah. So you may have gone to seminary, but you don't have to. You don't have to have any training. You don't have to, and seminaries don't have any guidelines. Like they don't have to be taught about child abuse or
mandated reporting laws and stuff.
There's a guy that said in one of his blogs, he's really out there about all the Baptist stuff, and he said a ham sandwich could be ordained in a Baptist church. Like it's just
now I'm hungry.
Yeah, there are just no qualifications needed.
Yeah,
and because of that, it's so trust-based. And in our instance, like the head pastor said when he hired him, that Don Fu said, I have something in my background that I can't get, my background checks, but it was a false accusation, and they just believed it.
Oh,
and they
we're
never
bit.
In all those years ran background checks. Nobody did until there was a time then.
Yeah.
There was a complaint. If you can maybe link the USA Today story too, if people want all the details, because we could go on there's so many details.
Yeah. I mean, we're in this meeting and there's all these excuses. And then Foose himself shared about how, I never really wanted to be here, but God wants me here and put me here.
And I wanted to leave after, because there had been an incident with a handicapped girl where he had come up behind her and picked her up underneath her breasts, whatever. And that was the thing that was really buried by, so the chairman of the board is the same for the church and the school. It's one and the same board. And the chairman of that board was a policeman. And he said that he would take on the investigation of that particular thing. And everybody trusted him. Away. Everybody trusted that he knew the law and he would take care of it. And so it was no big deal because he said it wasn't.
And we're jumping around a bit. I mean, so to that point, like, you know, Foose was like, well, it was another excuse of why it was okay.
Oh, I know I brought that up because he said he was going to leave after that incident, but that everybody kept telling him he should stay.
And so on that incident, I was on the board for 6 years. And at some point while I was on the board, there was an incident that involved Foose and involved an employee at the school. To my understanding, it was an allegation of inappropriate touching of Foose to this employee.
Who was an adult, but a mentally handicapped.
Yeah, she had, MHMA, what is the term? MHMR, and, so this was brought to the board of Foose had said, well, he was going to resign. The chairman of the board, who is a police officer, told the board, look, I will do the investigation. I'll check into this. I'll take care of it. You guys don't have to worry about it. And I'm on the board and I'm like, well, he's a cop and he's willing to run with it. Okay, I'll let him run with it. Well,
but we didn't know.
We didn't know.
He was a convicted child molester.
That would have changed things.
That would have definitely changed how you
would have approached it. How we all should have approached this.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, it was an internal investigation. And I'm doing air quotes, right?
It wasn't a real investigation.
He just checked it out and decided, there was nothing wrong here, nothing to see. Everything's great. Foose stayed on and everyone, moved on, game on. And, when we learned this about Foose, part of it was we started reevaluating every instance of interaction between our children and Foose, right? Yeah. But a whole nother part of it was when I was on the board, there were things, right? And this is one thing that stood out to me immediately, which was, well, wait a minute, a few years ago, there was allegations of inappropriate touching, and it wasn't brought up to the congregation.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I was on the board and I didn't get all the info of what happened when, who's involved, what was the result of the investigation. I mean, there was so much stuff over time that was covered up and not transparent, not shared. So, so all that to say, this was brought up when we were in the meeting with the three pastors and whatnot. The general theme of the meeting was, it's not a big deal. Why are you making a stink about this?
Yeah.
Cue ugly crying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I ugly cried the second half of the entire meeting, like really ugly, really loud. And the men just all kept talking and just ignored it. And
what do you do with this?
I mean, Dom was had his arm around me and stuff, and Nicole's rubbing my back, and I'm just falling apart because I'm thinking, I trusted these men and my children. How could you endanger my kids like this and say it's okay and not take any responsibility? How can you sit here and say these things to me? I just can't. Oh, it was just awful.
That was a fantastic meeting.
Yeah, it was. And then we just left it.
That was it.
And even the goodbye wasn't well, hopefully we can keep in touch. I mean, there was none of that. It was just
see ya.
Bye. I mean,
get out.
And then we were we thought, we would give up and just let other people handle it, but we couldn't because they weren't. And it just kept getting worse.
Yeah. And so, we became the bad guys in the situation, right? I mean, there were sermons about gossip and this is documented in the USA Today article, extensively of, we became reluctant whistleblowers because we felt very strongly that, parents need to know and understand the risks that their children are facing so that a parent can make a decision in the best interest of their child.
And even the past parents, anyone who's ever been there needs to know their kid was exposed to him.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
And they still don't.
Yeah.
Even though there was a USA Today story, that story did not run in our local area.
Yeah.
And we are coming across people constantly.
People that were at church with us who didn't even know and still don't.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody, when it's USA Today, it's you think that's such a big deal. It wasn't. The people who needed to find out didn't.
Yeah.
So we left. We became whistleblowers, kept bringing it up and bringing it up.
Well, and Foose retired,
He retired.
air quotes, that with no explanation at first.
Mm-hmm.
But then, because we wouldn't shut up, the gossip got so bad that he had to publicly confess to the church. So he got up in front of the church one Sunday, and
we weren't there.
We weren't there.
Fair.
But we heard about it. He confessed like a very minimalized version, very little of what happened, because we had the police report by that point.
The police report was very clear and frankly graphic of what happened. Why was he arrested and for what? What were the charges that he was brought, or went to prison for? Like, this information was there, and what he confessed to the congregation was incredibly minimalized, and the general approach was very victimizing to him and his family of, poor me, I have to step down and leave. And,
Yeah. And what about, that's what kept bringing up to, what are you doing to their family? And that's what they would say. You are destroying their family. That was said to us more times than I can. And I stood my ground on that. I said, he destroyed his family.
Yeah.
And we are protecting children from it happening any further.
Yeah.
He did this. It is all on him.
Yeah. I mean,
not me. Don't you dare tell me it's my fault.
So that began the amazing adventures of whistleblowers everywhere, right? Where you become demonized.
Yeah. Big time. Big.
Name calling and, that began, we
were attacked publicly on Facebook, privately.
By attacked, people making negative statements about us, not physically attacked.
Yeah. Pretty nasty comments.
Yeah, text. We were doxxed.
On Twitter. They shared all our personal address, phone number, all that kind of stuff.
And it was copied and pasted right out of the church directory.
Yeah, we figured that out.
The formatting of it was identical to the Oakwood church.
And it was
directory.
a very distinct formatting, so it wasn't an accident.
It was copied and pasted by a church member onto Twitter.
Even though they did it under a fake account,
a burner account, yeah.
And what else?
Well, there was someone left a giant incontinence pad on our front lawn.
Yeah, there were some weird things. Neat. Well, we weren't sure, some of those, did somebody do this? Is this a coincidence?
But you don't know. At one point, someone left potatoes on our front doorstep, we freaked out because oh my gosh,
are they trying to
poison
us?
Potatoes? Are they potato bombs? You don't know.
It turned out they were donated by
a church across the street.
But we were so terrified by this point because we had been stalked a little bit.
Yeah, there was so much.
We noticed people
around our house
staring in our windows from the street, and it was really freaky. And we actually had to get an alarm system because of this. We felt so we were terrified for our lives. And when we say that to people, we have had people just completely mock us for that, and it makes me so angry.
Oh wow!
Because I'm you have no idea what we felt.
Well, and that's
terrified.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to pause you guys right here because people, unless you've experienced being stalked,
yes,
you really have no idea what that experience is like. I mean, it is so terrifying on such a core level to feel this low grade fear all the time that something could happen or that you could be harmed and you guys have the kids in the house.
And that was it more so as the kids.
Yeah.
And even going public with the whole USA Today story, that was our biggest concern was the kids. But we had the reporter as well as Ashley Easter, and if you're familiar with her, we had a lot of advocates that we talked to before we decided to do that.
Yeah.
And they told us that, we can't say how you're going to feel, but overall, our experience has been when people go through similar things as you, they feel safer if they go public.
Yeah.
Because when your name's out there in relation to these people, they're less likely to come after you. So that helped us. We had a really hard time making that decision.
Wow.
but we decided it was worth it because so many children are endangered all over because this is happening everywhere. And I would like to read a quote right now. Can you bring that up? Rachel Den Hollander, who was the woman, she was the gymnastics Olympian who exposed Larry Nassar. And then I think something like 200 women came forward after she exposed.
It was a very high number.
It was a very high number of women. Maybe I'm wrong, but it was a lot of women came forward after that he had abused all these girls in the U.S. gymnastics. And so she's kind of been famous for that. She became a lawyer in order to fight him and fight things like this happening to protect children.
Amazing.
And it really is amazing. And she has a quote that says, it was a quote, right? Yeah, this is from Twitter. She tweeted this back on February 12th, 2020. A review of Protestant insurance companies found more reports of clergy sexual abuse than a review of Catholic insurance companies, even though Catholics actually keep better track. And those predators are often being shielded by more pastors. This isn't a few random wolves. And she's right. It is an entire culture in specifically, if I were to nail it down, I would say the Protestant evangelical church, which it includes, it's a broad term, but it's not every Christian church. I mean, I realize there are progressive Christian churches that maybe this isn't such an issue in, but very conservative churches where you might call them fundamentalists, Baptist through the roof. There have been 2 huge exposés written first, and I'm not going to know the dates for this, but first there was an article written I think maybe 2 years ago by Sarah Smith, where she exposed a huge number of pastors in the independent fundamentalist Baptist denomination. And that was in the she wasn't Houston Chronicle.
We can also, we'll put these articles.
I was going to say, I can't remember what newspaper.
Google is our friend.
The Star Telegram. Star Telegram. Okay. Yeah, I think that was it. And then a year after that ish was another one by Rob Downen about the Southern Baptist Convention, the SBC, where over 600 cases were uncovered. And that is a drop in the bucket. It's so many more than that. These are only the ones that actually got reported. It's a culture. It's an entire culture. And as an outcome of that, should I go ahead and bring up the database now?
Well, we're jumping around.
We're jumping around. We're all over the place.
Yeah, I mean,
there's so much.
We became whistleblowers. How about I'll fill it in quickly. So we became whistleblowers. It didn't end well for us, right? Mm-hmm. We'll just leave it at that. We began networking with other advocates because we realized what happened in our church was very, very common among Baptist churches. And we had tunnel vision, right? We're coming out of a Baptist church, Baptist, but it was all over the place in Baptist denominations and churches. Obviously, we had heard at this point that it was all over the place among, the Catholic Church. But it was a widespread issue among, IFB, the Independent Fundamentalist Baptist. But, it started coming out about other denominations, right? And non-denominational things. Mm-hmm. And just the widespread nature of this kind of abuse, that it takes place within a contextual bubble where it is protected, covered up, excused, and it continues. And, what happens to people? So Foose resigned. He wasn't even fired for, lying to all this stuff. He wasn't fired. He was let to resign, to retire.
He had zero consequence in this. Even when the police did an investigation after this, they did not even question him. He didn't have to talk to the police because nothing he had done.
Jumping ahead again. I mean,
rose to the level of a crime.
He resigned. We continued to be very vocal about it, which led to the police did another investigation because
Mhm.
so at this point, it was still fairly within the bubble. And I started making phone calls, as I had said. Well, I started calling the senior pastor who was there for 11 of our 12 years and said, look, did you know? Like, what did you know? And he said, well, I heard, there were false accusations. And I said, well, did you read the police report? Did you know that he actually did jail time for this? Like, you don't do jail time for false accusations. He didn't know. Like, he didn't know anything other than the narrative he was told, and he believed it. And again, the bubble mentality,
Mhm.
people inside our bubble are trustworthy.
Mhm.
If he says it's a false accusation, it must have been a false accusation. Let's just love Jesus together with him.
Wow.
Bubble, right? And so he didn't know. And, truth be told, I probably irritated him because I called him a lot and asked him a lot of questions. So finally, he wrote a letter to the board to share with the congregation of what he knew and when and stuff like that. This letter was mind-numbing. So the stuff that I knew about, just, the one incident of maybe allegations of inappropriate touching of a staff member was one thing, but there were a lot of incidents over the years that were brought up by people and were either covered up, or in the case of like a teacher complaining about Foos's interactions with children, they would be fired.
They fired several teachers. Well, Foos himself fired them. Yes.
Yeah. So.
And may I just bring up here aside, we have published this letter on our church trauma site. How would you search it? Supplemental documentation to the USA Today story, I think is what it's called.
Right.
Yeah,
and that 5-page letter is, if you read one thing, I'd read that even before if you didn't read the USA Today article. I mean, it just blow your mind.
Yeah, it was referenced in the USA Today article as well.
But they didn't like quote from it or anything.
Right. But that letter sparked 2 calls into Childline. You did one, and then
so I had done mine way before. I did mine as soon as we found out. That was
before the letter, then, wasn't it?
That was way before the letter. I called in, but nothing was done
because there was no evidence.
There was no evidence. Now there's evidence.
So this letter came out. It went to the board. The board shared it with congregants who had questions, but no one knew to have questions, right? So one of the board members took that letter and provided it to Childline, and that was enough concrete allegations that it sparked an investigation with the police. I don't know really a whole lot to say about that other than, people were allowed to call the police if they thought something went wrong, but by and large, people weren't told to even look or ask questions, right? So the investigation took place. Surprisingly enough, nothing really came as a result of that.
Well, the reason being, the police said that the school had to send out letters to every family that had ever been in the church or the school. Okay. So we were like, oh, yes, that's good, right? Wasn't so good because the letter said nothing. It said there was a pastor that had an incident with a child which was resolved before his coming to the church. They didn't say he was convicted. They didn't name him. They didn't. And so anyone,
charges, there was nothing to it.
And they just said, so if you have any concerns, please call. Well,
and was that letter distributed by the church?
It was by the school. I think it was technically by the school.
Did that, I think.
And and so then we over the time period, would just run into people and say, hey, did you get that letter? And they were like, and then we tell them what happened. And they were like, what? That letter didn't say that. Like, I had no idea. I would have had a totally different reaction had I known that. And so it's really bad. So these parents still don't know, except for what I've done on social media, which I've gotten a lot of flack for.
But that letter, wasn't that letter shared in the USA Today article? I think it was.
That was shared in the article. And we also reposted that in that blog about the supplemental documentation. Yeah.
So the letter was total crap.
The letter was total crap. It didn't inform anyone of anything. The police, in my opinion, this is my opinion,
Yeah.
overlooked the law and let them go because they did not follow mandated reporting laws. This entire thing, supposedly, everything else in this is legal. It was legal that they hired him. Because it is, and this is something most people don't know, we sure didn't know it, churches and private schools do not have to follow the same laws as, say, public school and secular institutions. There is Title IX is the name of the laws for sexual abuse that happens in secular universities, places like that. But any religious organization, because of separation of church and state, is not beholden quite the same way. And it's still illegal to molest children. It is. But it's not illegal to hire a child molester. Like a public school, you could never do this. You cannot get away with not doing a background check and hiring someone to work near children.
And as an example, after we had learned all this, I called my sister who ran a daycare, a secular daycare, right? And I just bounced this off her. Look, this happened. And she said, well, this shouldn't even be legal. Like they shouldn't be able to even be open by, their superintendent is a convicted child sex offender. Like that shouldn't be legal. Like how are they open at all? And to Megan's point, there appear to be different rules and guidelines for private religious schools than there are, say, a public school or even a private school that's non-religious affiliated. And, looking across the headlines, there are all these schools for, tough kids and stuff that are religious out in, you see these in the headlines a lot now where these schools have, myriad allegations of physical and sexual abuse of kids. And it's a religious institution. So some of those rules, it's so gray.
Children are less safe in church than they are in a public school. And it just is the way it is. That is so sad to me.
This is where I thank God that people like you are also exposing this, because like so many other parents, I'm sure people just don't know.
We sure didn't know.
No.
Right. And don't understand this, again, by law with the separation of church and state, that the same laws just don't apply.
They really don't. And there's so many loopholes. So like one of the other excuses was this technically wasn't illegal because even though he was acting as the superintendent of the school, he was paid by the church. Really things like that were technicalities that
he wasn't a school employee because his check was signed by the church, not the school.
It would have been worse had they paid him. And I'm like, so you're just letting it go like this? And then he, sure enough, went on to another church locally. It was like 20 minutes away from that church and was preaching. And one of my friends found it online and sent it to me. And I said, the gloves are off.
Yeah,
it is. It's over. Like, that's when we're like USA Today. Like we started with reporters. We're like, he's not stopping.
Enough.
And that was an unreal experience because they didn't want to hear it. That church didn't want to hear it. Oh, we're ministering to their family. They didn't know, meanwhile. What the pastor might have known, but when we sent the email to them, well, I did a Facebook post first because that's what I'm famous. And this is true. And advocates will say it everywhere. Social media is our greatest tool right now to get this stuff out because they hate it.
It's not within the bubble of their control.
Yeah, it's inappropriate to them. They'll just say, oh, this isn't the place to discuss this. Really? Where is? Behind your closed doors? Because that's the only place it's being discussed otherwise. And so I did a public post. Dom did an email, and we were sure that, and this is another thing I can recommend to anyone who goes through anything like this, email groups of people when you email, never just one person, because it can be buried so fast. So we emailed and we made sure we copied
Everyone and their
Everyone,
grandfather's dog.
That was on the staff there, whatever. So
The whole
that
church leadership. And we copied the director of the SBC.
Oh yeah,
SBC, the Keystone Baptist
the
Association.
State Baptist Association, the National, even somebody in the National Association.
And that's
So
an
they
important
knew
point.
this isn't a secret discussion here.
Yeah.
You're on everybody's radar. All of us know now. You can't hide.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Oakwood's approach after this, he left and they brought in, there's so much to say about this one. So they brought in an outside group to, smooth over, fixer, right? And smooth things over. So
that was terrible.
Another group came in and, they said a lot of the right things of, we don't want him to just move on. And if anyone asks us questions, we'll tell them what happened. But notice what they were doing there was, we will passively support, we'll passively stand against, say, Foose moving on to another church.
If somebody reaches out,
if someone reaches out to us, we'll tell them, but we're not going to reach out. And, we told them, look, he went to another church.
And so
20 minutes away.
So you copied them you copied Oakwood.
So
on
what
this
I
email
did
too.
is I said in the email to, the head pastor at this new church in Carlisle that Foose was at, preaching, right, in the pulpit, in a position of authority, spiritual authority. So
with kids present,
with kids
children
in the congregation, I said, look, Oakwood's leadership, their current board, has said they will be more than happy to answer any questions. What I'm doing is putting you in touch with them. Yeah. I copied all of them on the email because, again, the principle is cast as far wide a net as you possibly can, so that, because if one person gets it, that one person can just shut it down and keep it inside the bubble. So anyway, sent this email. What was the response? It was pretty fantastic.
It was very, very traumatizing.
It was.
I've published that too on the blog. I think I published that. It was basically, how dare you involve us in this? Like, you made it look like we approve of you exposing him and we don't. And you are destroying the Foose's lives. And you... Anyway, my response...
I'm on the wrong side of history there.
Oh, in a big way. And I responded to that. And that's all on our blog too. We have categories. There's a category for Narrowgate cult. There's a category for Oakwood, depending if you're interested in that. I let them have it. I'm like, no, no, you're on the wrong side of this. And, and like Dom said, I don't even think I said this in there, but you said you would, we could point people to you if they had questions. And now you're not even like wanting that,
that really, really hurt. Like, that was it for me. Like, I couldn't even respond to these people. Like, all along I had this false hope that, there could be a happy ending here. Yeah. That letter just destroyed everything.
Served.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they say all the right things, but when, you put them in a position to do the right thing and they still turn on you as the bad guy. And these were my friends, my family, board members from Oakwood that are turning on me and signing this letter. And
once again, they're using Christian language, Christian scripture to abuse us. They're saying
spiritual abuse.
They were saying this is not Christian love and charity, what you're doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just saying all these Christianese words to kind of beat us over the head, like we were doing the wrong thing.
And you need to publicly.
We have to publicly apologize, because I had made a comment when I did the public post. I said, the SBC refuses to protect children, and so we must do it ourselves. And he said that
was a lie.
Was uncharitable and untrue. Yeah. And we are working to protect children. And like, no, you're not.
And when given the
you're actually shutting down protecting children.
Yeah, when given the opportunity to step up and to, ride in to battle and show
like, okay,
that you've
we
learned
changed,
from
we
this,
learned,
and
we're doing it now.
we repented. That's a big Christian word for,
Yeah.
we realized we were wrong and we're going to act differently now. They blew it
And
again.
they just dug in. They just dug in further.
That was it for me. I mean, that was just it.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to any of these people. I don't ever want to talk to them again.
Yeah. And may I ask you, because it occurred to me as you were talking, and Megan, especially, just your whole demeanor and attitude feels so empowered. And I wonder, I have a question around kind of how has this changed you, or what has sort of happened for the two of you kind of coming out of this? Because here we are, and we're talking a lot about the case and kind of the legalities, but also there's this element of you guys have left for the second time, spiritual abuse.
Third.
Fourth, fifth.
Yeah, right.
Look, we left the cult. We went to this non-denominational church.
Like
Leaving there was traumatizing. Leaving the cult was traumatizing. We hid in a church. We went to Oakwood. Leaving Oakwood was traumatizing. But then we went to another church local. And you know what? Every Sunday, you were ugly crying in the bathroom. And I would consider it progress if I could make it through the service without breaking down crying. And, it was a good church. There were kind people. But we came to the point where we're like, look,
we see too much now,
and we can be here,
and everybody else, like, so the people that still go there, like, I know they think we're crazy, but we see, like, and I know it might seem minor when we point out the things to people, like having to sign covenant agreements.
Yeah.
That's a legal document, we've now realized. And this church did that. And we'll say these little things and they're like, yeah, but it's not a cult. It's not so bad. And it's just, for us, we know where it leads. We can't even tolerate the tiniest thing anymore. We're done. We're just done.
We just had to step out. And you stepped out first, and then I stepped out. Like, we all stepped out. And this was, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would say empowering is the perfect word of what I feel. A big part of that. So part of all of this was the trauma from the church that actually started with those panic attacks, whatever. My health completely nosedived. And turns out I got a Lyme disease diagnosis. And the doctors say I've had it a long time, they can tell. And probably was fine. My system was like managing it. But when this emotional trauma hit, it couldn't handle it anymore. And the Lyme took over. I was bedridden for 8 months. It was just, I fell apart emotionally. I had a breakdown in every way it's possible to break down. Did I not? It was unbelievable. But I started having to go to therapy, which was scary for me because we were always taught psychology was evil. Yeah. Like, psychology was, you should never do that. And I had to, like, it wasn't a choice. Yeah. And the whole world opened up to me through that therapy. And through a big part was actually, so we were in this other church, and then my health crash got super big, and my psychologist recommended, don't go to church. Like, your body can't heal if you're constantly re-traumatizing yourself. Yeah. Like, you've got to just take a break, at least for now. Yeah. And getting out of the Christian evangelical atmosphere for the first time in my life since birth, I was out for several months. And it was like life-changing. At the 3-month mark, I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt like a different person. Yeah. I felt more compassionate. I felt more tolerant of things like people like LGBTQ, for example. Yeah. That I always had that hard line, that's sin according to the Bible, and that's just the way it is. And just, I could see past that suddenly. Yeah. And at the 6-month mark, I couldn't even recognize myself. Wow. And with my therapist realizing, I was still that scared little girl who's been going through this ever since I was a child, being spiritually abused, and realizing I do have a voice now, and I can get away from this, and I don't have to subject myself to it anymore. And I can change the world now for the better. And I feel that now. I've never felt that in my life, but I feel like I can make a difference, and I can do something to change this, and help people. And, we're just discovering every day more things that we can do to help people. We've talked to so many people privately. It's just been amazing. It's been amazing. Just
the advocacy network that we've become a part of is, one of the hardest parts of coming out of a group like a cult, and coming out of a church, and coming out of Oakwood, and and even the last church we left, there was pain, because this is my new family, and the social aspect of a church or a religious organization, there's nothing like it. Just the social aspects of, I've got people that care about me and that I can talk to, and I have friends now and a network, and my kids can play with their kids, and all of this stuff is in the bubble, and when you come out of that, it is so traumatizing.
And can I add to that, we also homeschool. We did not do that for religious reasons. We did that because of our daughter's diagnosis, and we tried school, and it just did not work for her. But it was another layer of isolation. It was unintended, but in this area of the country, homeschooling is a very Christian endeavor in general. And so again, all our friends through that were Christian. And this just hit me last week, actually. This is all still unfolding constantly. But we've been isolated because of my illness. Well, leaving the church, then my illness. I was bedridden, like I said, for 8 months, probably in the house over a year, without leaving other than doctor's appointments. And then COVID, and then it's like just all this isolation. And I started to think, I got to do something for these kids. They're suffering, and maybe next year, we'll be able to get back out into the world. And I started looking for homeschool co-ops, because I'd like to keep homeschooling. Not sure that we will, but, just for various totally non-religious reasons. But I started looking at the co-ops, and they all have a statement of faith that you have to sign. And I can't sign it anymore. And so there goes that whole support system. Like, we have no community other than our advocate friends online.
Once you leave the bubble, what else is there? And thankfully, so many wonderful, kind advocates have come into our lives, right? And have become, kind of that family for us, and we
do have our family back.
We have our family back, which is great. And there is life outside the bubble.
Leaving.
It's hard on them.
It's hard on them that we left the church.
The bubble.
Very hard.
I am delighted to offer you Pure Haven products. All proceeds received go right back to the Project Hope podcast. I myself have been using these pure, safe, and toxin-free products for over 4 years, and I absolutely love knowing that my home has countertops that my little niece and nephew can eat off of without worrying that they have a handful of chemicals being placed in their mouths. The cleaning products are some of my favorites. The glass and surface cleaners smell amazing as well. So if this is of interest to you, please go to purehaven.com/Jennifer French. The link is also included below with information about this podcast segment.
But, all that to say, it took time, and that's how we became kind of advocates, right? I don't know, in some ways, unwilling advocates. I would have loved a quiet life that doesn't have to butt heads with, predators and stuff. But this is where we're at. And there's so many other advocates that have come around us, and, we've learned from people. And that's kind of how we started, the database of tracking, because,
no, we have to preface that. Nobody knows what that is in this audience.
I can't just jump around.
No.
Oh, yeah.
So you want me to tell the story of how that kind of started? Because I'll start it and then you can finish it.
There you go.
So I was out to dinner with a friend before COVID, and
from the last church we attended.
Yes. And I was better from the Lyme enough that I could get out there for a brief while in between. And we were talking about, she didn't grow up in the evangelical circles. And so I was just kind of trying to explain to her what it's like, because it's so different for people who aren't. And, telling her about how this is this huge epidemic with these pedophile pastors, and, and how, there's a big push for the SBC church in particular, the Southern Baptist, to have a database that tracks the pastors that have abused people, like the Catholic Church does. The Catholic Church has bishop accountability, it's called. And the Southern Baptist Convention refuses to do it. They've refused. Krista Brown is one of the advocates. She was abused by a pastor years ago, and she's been pushing for 15 years for the SBC to have this database, and they refuse to do it. Amazing. And so I was talking with this friend, telling her about all this, and I was saying, sometimes I just wonder, why couldn't we just do that? Why can't we just make it our own database? Like, why does somebody official have to do it? And she's like, well, why do they? Why can't you do it? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I can. And so I don't know. I've learned intuition so much now, because it was always, I had to deny that my whole life.
Yeah.
Now I feel like all that I'm making up for lost time. My intuition's just been like on fire. I love it. I love it. But anyway, so I felt this like burning, like, oh my gosh, this is what I need to do this. Why wouldn't I do this? So I went home to Dom and I told him about it. And he was like, well, it sounds, he's like, I don't know, legally, it seems like it would put us in a bad place, and and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, but I'm like, it's just burning in me. And so both of us separately, I think, started researching, and he came to me the next day and said, maybe if we set it up like this and this, maybe we could do it. And I was like, yes, let's do it. Yeah. And then it happened so fast. It was like a month. Well, it took a little while longer than that, I think, because Ashley Easter, she was an advocate friend who, it took a while for her to get us set up with other advocates to have a meeting to just discuss how this would work. Yeah. And then after that, it took a month.
Not long. It was very fast. Yeah. And, part of it was, why can't this be done? And then that was immediately followed by research. And Krista Brown started Stop Baptist Predators, right? A database. She started one.
Yeah.
And, down with the Houston Chronicle did a pseudo database, the abuse of faith, and that was more SBC related, right? But, there was, so our site is
all Baptist.
All Baptist.
We would love it to be more than that. It's just the two of us right now.
You got to start with what you can handle. But there was one for bishop accountability for Catholic Church, and there's one for Anglican churches, Anglican Watch, and there's one for Mennonite churches. The map list, and they already exist. We just didn't know about them. And why can't we talk to some of these other people and start to network and start to brainstorm and so that is kind of snowballed. And there are other, the Preacher Boys is doing a database with IFBs, and there, all that to say there's a ton of databases out there
that we're just now discovering.
Yeah. And why can't we network with these people and understand what works, what doesn't? And that's kind of how this started for us.
So we have our own database. Yeah, it is all Baptists of any kind. Right. So we include the IFB,
Southern
the
Baptist,
SBC,
Independent Baptist.
Yeah.
And people, if you spoke at like a Baptist thing.
Yeah, we're being very broad with it.
Yeah.
Any Baptist
right. So
connection
as an example,
at all,
like Ravi
is fine.
Zacharias, he wasn't necessarily a Baptist, but he spoke at an SBC big hullabaloo thing.
Yeah, and not that he needs to be in there because everybody knows probably pretty much, but maybe you've heard of him. He's just been in the news lately. He was like the biggest evangelical apologist of our time, and it turned out that he was sexually abusing women his entire career.
Was raping and abusing women.
Yeah, and that just all came out like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, Julie Royce has a lot of documentation on that on the Royce report.
So it's just been interesting, but like we do include, like he would qualify for the database because he spoke at Southern Baptist conventions, even though he's strictly, I think it's Christian Missionary Alliance CMA, or something. Right. Yeah. So
because it's about influence.
We wish we could just open it to everything. We just don't have the manpower yet, but we are going to be probably starting a nonprofit, make it a little more official, in which case it could get to be something bigger. I don't know. Maybe we could have people on staff that could be.
I mean, we have a lot more of options.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, as it stands, it's just us, right? And you know,
we're just doing what we find and what.
Yeah, there's so much out there already in the news and in the media.
Yeah. And it is a grassroots was our vision.
Right.
It's open. We want any listener to know this. Like, you can go to the Baptist accountability.org and there's a place to enter in. And we would love for people to just, even if you have this as a passion or something, just start Googling and finding predators and entering them into the database. We're just trying to get as many recorded as we can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder, honestly, I sort of have this vision as you guys are speaking that some gung-ho advocate, college student, or beyond, somebody who's kind of wanting to be in this field could do like an internship with you and help.
Oh my goodness, that's an amazing idea.
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah,
so that idea.
Yeah, of course we'll add the.
Hopefully they're listening to this podcast.
Yeah, I know, and I know that you guys have also mentioned some people and some articles and things like that. That just for listeners, I'll kind of revisit those with Megan and Dom, and we'll put all of that in the podcast notes because there's such amazing, rich information that you guys are sharing, and I think it's I think people will be interested in researching some of this stuff and reading about it online as well. So
it's so necessary. I mean, look at Narrowgate as an example, right? So the cult leader just literally no repercussions, just moved on. Yeah. And we found out recently that he was a senior vice president for Andrew Womack Ministries,
which is a multi-million-dollar. He's if you've ever heard of him, he's a televangelist.
Yeah. And
he also runs
Charis. Is it Charis?
Charis Bible Colleges. It's two separate organizations. There's Andrew Womack Ministries International, and there's Charis Bible Colleges, both run by Andrew Womack. Our cult leader is senior vice president of both organizations, meaning he's working with college students again.
He's back in a position of influence, spiritual and otherwise, over impressionable college students. That terrifies me. But the point is, they just move on. Look at Foose, right? At Oakwood. Well, look, he was somewhere before he was at Oakwood, and he just.
But everybody kept it quiet. There's no record of anything.
No way to track him, and that's the point. After Oakwood, and look, Oakwood burnt to the ground, right? 100 people down to. God knows how many, but not
like a hand, like less than 10.
You couldn't have a football team with him. He just went to Carlisle Baptist. Well, guess what? He got exposed there, and that's where the USA Today, and all of that came in. Where is he now? Like, he's somewhere, or maybe he's not. But the point is, what they tend to do is just move on quietly. Mm-hmm. And the organization, whether it's the SBC or otherwise, tends to allow this to happen without accountability. So baptistaccountability.org, then it's in the name, right?
At least if people Google now a person, their entry should come up.
Because all we're doing is bringing resources that are publicly available together in one place. It's already out there, but where's the accountability for these people? Because the damage mentally, physically, sexually, psychologically that these spiritual leaders can have on others is absolutely tremendous. And there's precious little that, and I'm going to do air quotes, the sheep. What can the sheep do? A lot of times they have no idea, and they enter the bubble, and everyone around them says everything in the bubble is good and safe. And don't talk about bad stuff because we're in the bubble and everything's good. There are no repercussions. I mean, one of the members of Narrowgate, committed suicide. Was it a direct result of Narrowgate? I have no idea. But guess what? Several people that have come out of Narrowgate have been struggling with mental health issues, us included, to this day. And that's one example. Baptist churches, mental health issues and emotional trauma and PTSD and CPTSD. The damage being done by these individuals is catastrophic. And what else do we have
and no one is being referred to outside psychological help. They're being referred to Christian counseling that is within the church, that is unlicensed. There is a certification. There's a college now for Christian counseling. If you're interested, just anyone who wants to go down a rabbit trail, look into Christian counseling. It is Nouthetic is another name, Nouthetic. But it's another
biblical counseling.
It's also called biblical counseling. Very, very dangerous. Completely not anything like licensed therapy. Their mindset, they're even telling women, this is a big thing. It's in a lot of the advocacy circles now and blogs and things. Their biblical counselors will often recommend that a woman in an abusive marriage stay, because you're supposed to submit. Your quiet spirit is supposed to win them, your husband, and so no, you don't leave. And unless he committed adultery, you can't leave. They're very letter of the law with the scripture. And since the scripture doesn't specifically say you can leave if you're abused, that means you can't.
Well, and again, I mean, you guys are also addressing a lot of what we've talked about is legit legal abuse.
It is.
That's illegal, that's considered illegal by national standards. However, what you're also addressing is this interesting phenomenon that really is, I would say, you can get more specific around this, but really this kind of cult environment or groups of high control, high demand. I'm so glad that, like Dom, you put this so well, because even with Narrowgate, it's a great example. He had sexual relations with somebody else, but because they're adults, there's nothing illegal about any of that.
Yeah.
But we know, I know just from having listened and received this story, there is lots of manipulation at play. And so it's very similar. This is why this term coercive control that Evan Stark brought in relation to domestic abuse was so important, because that is now coming into some of the language of the law. And so legally, you see that there is advocacy for an awareness coming in about psychological manipulation and abuse.
Yeah. Right. But it's not all physical. If your husband doesn't hit you, it doesn't mean you're not being abused.
Right. And what we see is that has not transitioned yet into kind of the world of cultic groups or groups of high demand, high control. People just don't understand these principles. And you see it all the time when people like you share their stories, as you said, that time and time again, I'm sure you've received, how on earth could you stay there? Why on
the time?
Yeah.
How on earth could this happen? All those things. And that is one of the things that I would so like for this podcast to help with, to just spread this reality that people really don't understand yet, that there's abuse happening, but because it's psychological,
Right.
Yeah.
it doesn't get recognized, and there really is nothing you can do about it. I mean, for example,
Leave.
right,
Yeah.
my cult leader is still functioning. It is having major repercussions, not only on the lives of these people that are still with him, but their families as well. I mean, Margaret Singer, in her book about cults, calls it a social kind of epidemic, that it is destructive to our society at large that this is happening. And really, people just don't understand yet. I really think, we're just kind of on the cusp of this awareness.
And
right?
Education is everything right now. Like, all we can do is try to get the word out. And my friends are so sick of me doing it. I'm like on Facebook putting out the war cry all day, every day. I'm like, please pay attention. And I know they think I'm annoying, but I think it's the only voice I have right now. It's the loudest I can be is online.
Amazing. And I feel such gratitude for the two of you, both independently and then kind of as a team, how you've come together and, collaborated in these ways that have just resulted in amazing things. And I hope, it really is my hope that not just this podcast, but I'm sure moving forward, one of my greatest gifts of doing this podcast is meeting people like you, where I know there is something in the future, and I've got you as a resource, and we have one another to kind of spread this word.
Right. Same with you. We've already been able to say, oh, we know someone who does a podcast. You should talk to her. You should be on her podcast because your story with Victoria and all that, amazing.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I'm sure Victoria would not mind me saying publicly, because she obviously came on the podcast and shared the story. So it was Megan that introduced us. And because of the podcast, I ended up speaking to 5 different people that gave me permission to put them in touch with Victoria. And one of them was so sensitive about it, she actually wanted me to use a pseudonym. And now I know Victoria does know her identity. But these things are so sensitive, of course.
Of course.
Right.
Now my hope is that Victoria is now able to hopefully work with either detectives or police in a way that if we've got all these stories together, there's a hope that someone will listen in the way that they obviously didn't. I mean, her case is shocking too.
Oh, I have chills. Yes. But this is so beautiful.
And so thank you. That is a
networking,
of this collaborative amazingness. I'm sure it's why you both are also speaking to this community of advocates that you've met, because they're amazing people and people who have woken up in some way to injustice that's happening and want to unite in that.
Yes.
So I thank God for you both. And
we thank God for you too, Jennifer. Really.
Amazing. Really. Thank you for your work. Thank you for sharing so openly, because again, I think to really receive these nuances and details around your story, I so hope that I really do think that it's in some of these details that allow for people to make these connections that if stories are told more on a surfacey level, you just don't understand or process it in the same way. And so you guys have just so beautifully shared how, I mean, literally, I feel like when you were both talking about Narrowgate, it's sort of like at one point, Dom, I think in a matter of 2 minutes, you basically nailed 5 different things that make a cult a cult. It's just
planned it that way. I have a checklist.
Notes.
I'm not a hoarder. I'm a researcher.
He's done a lot more studying on the cult issue than I have, for sure. And I think I told you earlier, I still have a ways to go. my onion is still peeling. I don't think I have processed it quite as deeply as Dom has, and I will when I'm ready. But
that's the beauty in this. Like,
Yeah.
we're all of us, everyone listening and us, and we're all on this journey, and our paths are going to intersect, and we can help each other out. And it's not about, oh, I'm this far ahead and you're not. It's, look, we're in this together, and we can help each other.
Right. And I think also the compassion that we all have due to our own experience. And it struck me, Megan, that you were kind of saying, as you were kind of awakening out of the fog of that bubble of having been, that you had been in for a very, very long time.
47 years.
That you're also
I'm 45, so it's been 2 years now since that I've been awakened somewhat.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing, that then you are able to also have a different experience of oneself, just that you're to be awakening to kind of a new compassion for others because of your experiences.
It makes me sad that it took this long, but I'm so thankful that I'm here. I mean, I'm so thankful, that I'm experiencing it at all. I could have just spent my whole life not realizing any of it. So.
And we're sharing a little bit, earlier, and it's, so much of my life, and I'll just use my pick on myself, right? So much of my life was seeing other people as a target to evangelize or proselytize, and not seeing them as people, right? And, it took me, to my shame, so long to get to the point where I'm looking at people now around me, and everyone has a story, and everyone has hurts and have been through things. And, there's so much beauty and compassion and just listening to people as people, not as targets,
Not caring like what they believe or what.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not saved. That was such a thing for us,
Yeah, being Christian or being in our evangelical bubble or being, King James only, or you're this denomination of Baptist, not that. None of that matters. Ultimately, like, we're people, and people around us are real people with, complex, and there's just so much shame in my life looking back of, I never took the time to listen to even these people I'm talking to now that came out of Narrowgate. Like, I'm sorry. I never reached out to that person when they were kicked out of the group and shunned. It's not too late now to do that. Yeah. And there's beauty in doing that.
And it's okay to admit you were wrong.
Yeah.
And turn around.
Yeah.
And
then to receive kind of the gifts of that as well, that after it's so scary to leave and you're really leaving absolutely everything you've known, to then kind of receive this gift of, wow, these people that I've been thinking of as a certain way or within this certain context, look at the amazingness of just getting to interact with one human, and all those Dom that you're talking about, and all the experience that one individual holds. It really is such a joy to be out of that cage, really,
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I went into I was living kind of a normal life, and then went into the cage and then out, and also having very similar experiences to you two of how amazing it is. All these people that I thought were so kind of lesser than us because they're not believers in a certain way. And it's
yet I never would have said that when I was in it. I never would have thought that's what I was thinking. Do you know what I mean? I totally didn't. I know I didn't. I totally didn't think I was up on my high horse or thinking I was better.
Right.
But I was. Yeah.
And that's part of those clouds parting, isn't it? It's just, you just don't know until you're on the other side.
That's true. Yeah. You never know you're in a cult until you're out of a cult. I heard somebody say that once.
I was in a cult?
It's hard. You usually don't know you're in one when you're in it.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure, as always, to speak with you both. And I have hopes that I feel like at some other point your voices might be back on this podcast for some reason.
Anytime. Anytime, Jennifer.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Project Hope podcast. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe and comment. You can always get in touch with me at jennifer-french.com. And please let me know any specific topics of interest. And of course, I'm always interested in your stories, whether you've left an organization of high demand, high control, or if you're an individual struggling with the knowing that someone you love is in such a situation. I am here for you. Think critically, take heart, and be free.